Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dean, relatively early on in the Nixon cover-up, you told the president that there was a cancer on the presidency, and then you came forward and blew the lid off of the whole cover-up. Then you pleaded guilty, you paid your debt to society, and since that time you have been an exemplary individual committed to truth, justice, and protection of the rule of law, and for that I want to thank you for your service to our country. For the rest of the witnesses, thank you for your testimony today. On January 25th, 2018, the New York Times reported that in June of 2017, the president ordered Don McGahn to have Special Counsel Robert Mueller fired. Shortly after that news broke, the president went on TV and said, quote, "Fake news, folks, fake news, a typical New York Times fake story," end quote. The report, however, documents a flurry of events. The Mueller Report documents a flurry of events behind the scenes after the Times reporting came out. Page 114 of the Mueller Report says, quote, "On January 26, 2018, the president's personal counsel called McGahn's attorney and said that the president wanted McGahn to put out a statement denying that he had been asked to fire the special counsel and that he had threatened to quit in protest. McGahn's attorney spoke with McGahn about that request and then called the president's personal counsel to relay that McGahn would not be making that statement. McGahn's attorney informed the president's personal counsel that the Times story was accurate in reporting that the president wanted the special counsel removed. Accordingly, McGahn's attorney said, although the article was inaccurate in some respects, McGahn could not comply with the president's request to dispute the story, end quote. Mr. Dean, why could Don McGahn not comply with this request to put out a statement denying that he had been asked to fire Mueller?
Because, excuse me, because it would have been I suspect what he had in his, I'm projecting myself into his position. He didn't want to put out a false statement. He didn't want to become embroiled in something that he knew was troublesome. He'd already expressed that. It's not dissimilar from a situation I found myself in when Nixon announced on August 29th of 1972 during the campaign that when he was asked why didn't he appoint a special counsel, he said, well, because the Congress is investigating Watergate, the FBI is investigating Watergate, the General Accounting Office is looking into why the burglars had fresh $100 bills in their pocket. There are a number of committees of Congress that are starting to look at it. But he said, most importantly, my White House counsel, John Dean, has investigated this entire matter and found that nobody presently employed in this White House had anything to do with this bizarre incident.
And that was a lie?
And that was a lie. It was the first I heard of my investigation. And I was then asked after that repeatedly to issue a report based on my non-existent investigation.
And you declined to do so? Why?
I did because it would have been a lie.
And what would have been the result for you?
Theoretically, depending upon the venue, it could have been anything from a false statement to a perjurious statement. You
could have gone to prison, in other words.
Yes.
For doing what you were asked to do.
By the president.
Thank you. Page 115 of Volume 2 states, quote, on January 26, 2017, Hope Hicks recalled that the president asked White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders to contact McGahn about that New York Times story, and McGahn told Sanders there was no need to respond and indicated that some of the article was accurate, end quote. Mr. Dean and also Professor VANCE and Professor McQuaid, What is your reaction to this internal effort to get McGahn to dispute the press report? Mr. Dean?
I'll defer to the ladies to start first.
Well, Congressman, I'll just say that this is part of 4 successive steps that the president takes in an effort to get the White House counsel, Don McGahn, to change the story. Just in response to a press report, the Mueller report is very careful to say that at the point that this cascading series of requests go from the president to McGahn, they're outside of that window where you would just be trying to respond in the press. And this looks like an affirmative effort to create an official record that would confirm the president's story here, which is that he did not try to get McGahn to fire Bob Mueller. And so there are actually 4 conversations. As you've reflected, there's the counsel-to-counsel call. There's Hope Hicks's testimony about the president's conversation with his press secretary. He has an additional conversation with Rob Porter, the staff secretary, and then finally, there's this Oval Office meeting where the president says to Don McGahn, look, you need to change your story. I did not ask you to fire Mueller. And McGahn pushes back. And so we have this series of efforts that don't culminate in obstruction because McGahn refuses to cooperate. But as Professor McQuaid has already told us, this sort of crime, obstruction of justice, does not depend upon completing the crime. The attempt to obstruct justice is really the problem here. That's what interferes with the functioning of our criminal justice system, and that's why this conduct is so deeply troubling.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman...
Could I ask that Ms. McQuaid, Professor McQuaid, also be able to answer that question?
If she's brief.
I will be brief. The only thing I would add to that is it demonstrates why it's important to look at the totality of the circumstances and the conclusion that Robert Mueller makes with regard to all 4 of those incidents that Professor Vance referred to is that there was substantial evidence of an intent on the part of President Trump to prevent scrutiny of